2 days of February. It's almost unimaginable that it is already almost the end of February. It goes quickly. Though I do recall my many days in schools between February and April breaks, and no, this is roller skating time. So it's good to see everyone. Thank you for jumping on. I'm kicking things off today because we've been fielding a number of questions from folks in Cohort 1 asking questions about federal funding and about whether or not any federal funding associated with this project could be implicated or impacted by anything that's happening with regard to the investigations that have been undertaken by the U.S. Department of Ed. And I just wanted to say and confirm for folks that the funding for this project for the transition of the FAPE and child fine responsibilities from CDS to SAUs has been an investment at the state level and is not using federal funds. Certainly, there are some federal funds associated between 611 and 619, but overall, those are a very small fraction of what we're talking about. What you are using and what you are getting from the Department of Education here in Maine are state dollars. And this law that requires us to make this transition is one that requires that the state of Maine pay 100% of those costs. So I wanted to just sort of say that as affirmatively as I possibly can. And I'll pause here and give it my best wait time to give folks a chance to ask questions or process that. All right. That wasn't high school wait time, just so we're clear, but it seemed good enough. Tip into passive aggressive any second there. So I'll hand it over to Sandy.
Thank you, Megan. So today we have a guest speaker. We have Ariana Whiting, who is our Part C coordinator, currently under the umbrella of CDS, but rebranded as Early Intervention for Me. And she has already spoke to this group previously about the Part C to Part B transition. We invited her back to kind of refresh us on the process, but also dig a little deeper into some timelines that will be important coming up, especially regarding summer timelines and then late referral timelines. While Ariana is presenting, if you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we will make sure that we answer all of your questions. So please welcome Ariana Whiting.
Thank you, Sandy. Hi, everyone. I hope that our time together today is not too duplicative of previous presentations or information that I've shared with you all. And I know that it will not be anything new for many of my colleagues that I see on the call from CDS. Do you all see the correct view? Sandy, could you help me out?
No, we're seeing your presenter view.
Okay. I have had such issues with PowerPoint today. I apologize. How do I change the view? I
think if you hit escape and there you go. Now it's perfect.
There.
Well, sort of.
Thank you.
So two other quick things. There are some Zoom fields. One is probably our beautiful faces that are up and down your right side. Yep. So if you can tuck that down, there you go. And same with that one. Yep. You can move the toolbar up or down or over. Done.
Thank you, Megan. I promise I'm technologically savvy. Typically, I don't know what's going on today. All right. So my name is Ariana Whiting. I am the Early Intervention Part C coordinator, and I shifted into this role in March of last year. Prior to that, I was the data manager for Part C and Part B 619 CDS. So many of you are very familiar through that work, and I'm happy to see you all again today. So we'll start today by just doing a brief overview of kind of the typical transition process for children that are enrolled in early intervention. pretty much prior to their second birthday. And then we'll shift to talking about kiddos that are referred after their second birthday and special considerations for late referrals. And squeezed in between that, we'll talk a little bit about summer birthdays, recognizing that early intervention for me operates on a calendar year, while we, of course, recognize that all of you operate on a school year calendar. So I wanted to have some conversations about how we could work together to make sure that we can hold transition conferences for kiddos that are turning 3 over the summer. So this graphic is really more for your future reference when you review this slideshow rather than right now, since I recognize that the font is very small, but rather than focusing on these small boxes with lots of text, I just want to focus on these larger bars. The transition process really starts with early intervention for me, sharing information with the family about their child's potential eligibility for early childhood special education when they turn 3. Our goal is to really start this when the child enters early intervention, because the first 3 years of life are really a short period of time in the grand scheme of things. And children are developing so rapidly that families have a lot to think about, and a lot is changing in that short period of time. So we start that process really when a child enters early intervention, and depending on the age of the child, the conversations will definitely be geared toward their age. You know, you're not going to talk about the 3-year-old birthday if you have an infant in your program, but a lot of kids enter our services at like 1.5. And from our perspective, as we're thinking about preparing for this really significant transition in a family's life, 1.5 is approaching the 3rd birthday, which seems a little bit crazy. And so then at 2 years and 3 months, we really formalize that transition planning process with the family and share a lot more information about what early childhood special education looks like in their particular town or area. And then we want to loop you all in and loop in early childhood special education to share information about the child and family with parental consent, and schedule what we call a transition conference meeting, which is when we really want to give the family an opportunity to meet their child's potential IEP team or the representatives from this school that will be facilitating the IEP eligibility process. And we have to hold that meeting by law by the time the child is 2 years and 9 months, or 3 months before their 3rd birthday. So I am going to advance my slides as we talk about this, because I have slides for each step in this process. Again, this notification is kind of how we prepare for the transition conference. We invite the family, ourselves, and an SAU or CDS representative, depending on who has the FAPE obligation for that area, and convene a transition conference to help the family prepare for that transition into early childhood special education. Those first 2 steps are in a darker blue because those are Part C, early intervention for me responsibilities. Then we shift into this lighter blue, and these 3 steps, 2 of which are formal meetings, are the responsibility of Part B, 619, early childhood special education. So the transition conference must be held at least 3 months before the child's birthday, so when they reach the age of 2 years and 9 months. In order to meet that timeline, we, depending on the needs of the child, want to start that process quite a bit earlier than that, of course. You can't try to, plan a party for Saturday on that Tuesday. So we may start trying to schedule around 2 years and 5 months, 2 years and 6 months, but legally we cannot hold that transition conference before the child reaches the age of 2 years and 3 months, or 9 months before their 3rd birthday. Again, that is an early intervention for me responsibility. So we send the advance written notice and we facilitate the meeting. We invite the SAU representative. And the goal here is really to just introduce the family to the school, talk about what the transition process is going to look like, including the process of determining eligibility and next steps in that process, what it looks like what are the potential supports and services available, where might those services take place. And then we've kind of had some conversations about school registration, which is very new to me in Part C, but something that we really want to learn from all of you about, how we can support families through that school registration process, because we have built relationships over time and have lots of contacts with families as they approach 3. So after the transition conference is held, I just want to be super clear. I have received this question quite a bit. The early intervention services do continue after the transition conference and throughout the transition process until the day before the child's 3rd birthday. Any subsequent evaluations that may be referred for after the transition conference or any changes in the IFSP, we are working toward making sure that we schedule a formal meeting or at least communicate with early childhood special education staff so that they, know if anything has changed or happened since the transition conference. And again, I wanted to reiterate that our providers are in homes with families or in the community typically once a week at least, sometimes less frequently depending on the individual child's needs, but we have, lots of communication, and it could be helpful if you're having trouble obtaining parental consent for an evaluation, or, if you want the family to receive a little bit of guidance or help with that school registration process, we would be happy to help with that. So after the transition conference, we would hope to be invited, early intervention for me would hope to be invited to the IEP initial referral meeting. It is convened and scheduled by the early childhood special education team, and therefore they send the advance written notice for that meeting. It's very important that early intervention for me is invited to that meeting, since the child's present levels of performance are going to be discussed, including their strengths and needs. And we can really help the family just act as a partner. We've been working with that family potentially for quite some time and know that child well, so we could provide some valuable input into that process, but we can also serve as a support for the family in that. During that meeting, existing evaluations will be reviewed that may have been completed by early intervention for me, specifically within the past year, that could be used to determine eligibility for early childhood special education. And the team would, of course, discuss and propose potential additional evaluations necessary to establish eligibility for Part B. And then after that meeting, you would attempt to get parental consent for the evaluations. And then, of course, those evaluations must be completed within 60 days of obtaining that parental consent. Then after that, after the evaluations have been completed, would be the initial eligibility meeting. And this must be held before the child's 3rd birthday so that their IEP is written and ready to implement on their 3rd birthday. It would be convened again by early childhood special education, and they would send the advance written notice. We'd like to be invited. It's very important for us to follow through and see if children are eligible and make sure that they have a seamless transition into early childhood special education if they're eligible. And at the meeting, the evaluations are reviewed, eligibility is determined, and the IEP is developed. So now we're going to get into the good stuff, since this will be less familiar, I think, to folks, and an opportunity for conversation and maybe some case study discussions. So summer birthdays, kiddos that are eligible for early childhood special education must have their IEP written and ready to implement by their 3rd birthday. But there is kind of the recognition that the school year, unlike early intervention, does not necessarily go year round. So that creates 2 considerations, I think. We will hope to collaborate so that we can take care of all of this, if possible, in the spring before the child turns 3 over the summer, if we can anticipate that. But as we go on today, we'll talk about late referrals and late eligibility to Part C, where that might not be possible. So it might be necessary for schools to conduct evaluations and develop IEPs over the summer. And while an IEP must be written and ready to implement during before the child turns 3, it doesn't necessarily have to be implemented over the summer. It can be written to start in the beginning of the school year. So this is kind of where I wanted to pause if we can, and I need to change my view so I can see you all without looking over there.
And there's a question, Ariana.
Perfect. Good. Let me stop screen sharing just for a minute so we can have this conversation. Where did you all go? All right. I found you. All right, let's read the question.
I can read it. Sue Terrell was asking, do you always have to do an observation? I was told it is the practice that is followed, but observation was only a few months old, so wasn't feeling it was needed. I'm assuming, Sue, that this was at an eligibility meeting and the observation was a few months old that you were reviewing.
It was a transition meeting. So the kiddo currently has services. We're doing the transition meeting for us and determining whether or not we needed to do anything moving forward. And I was like, what do you mean I have to do an observation? Like, why? I didn't understand the why, but they told me that they always did it. So.
And I'm assuming this is the transition from Part C to Part B.
Yes, that's what we're talking about today. Part C to Part B, trying to figure out like, what is that just best practice? Like I didn't understand because I had what I needed to complete the eligibility. And they're like, oh no, we always do an observation. We always at least do an observation. And I was like, but it's only 2 months old. What's, and I know kids change rapidly. Like I get that kids change rapidly, but 2-month-old observation. And it actually took me mailing it 3 times to the family to get it signed. And, now we need to meet again to go over the observation to create an IEP. And I could have just done it all in that one meeting and saved all of us some time and energy. So
I'm assuming when you are saying that you were told this, it was by CDS staff.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to look to Dan because I don't want to contradict any practices in CDS, but
it could be that we maybe want to talk internally. Sue, if you could email us and let us know and we can review that. That sounds a little off. So, but again, I think I just don't want to put Dan on the spot. Hi, Dan, you're probably somewhere.
Well,
but I thought,
yeah,
unless you know something, Dan, that you want to share.
No, I think that handling it kind of outside of this, and if there's more global guidance that we can provide to folks, I think that'll be the best way to kind of get this resolved as quickly as we can.
I appreciate it. Like, I understand wanting to get eyes on the kiddo, getting to know the kiddo, all of that piece, but obviously it's a paperwork piece too, of getting that consent and then having to meet again before we can just move forward with developing that IEP in the service part. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Sandy, would you like to move down through the chat and we can answer some of the other questions too?
Yeah. Kathy Beal asked, are children identified at an early age prior to 3, typically a child with autism?
I love this question, and I'd be happy to come back and give a presentation on Part C in general and Part C eligibility. I don't think there is an easy yes answer by any means, or no, but I would say no, only because children are eligible for so many different reasons. We have essentially 3 pathways to eligibility in early intervention. One is a developmental delay exhibited on the Battelle Developmental Inventory. But we also have this thing called established conditions of risk. And so a child with autism, for example, would automatically qualify for early intervention based on the fact that they had a previous diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, among many, many other medical, chromosomal, hereditary genetic diagnoses. So I think there are like 500 maybe diagnoses on that list that make a child automatically eligible for early intervention services. The third pathway is essentially, it's called the informed, clinical opinion of the evaluators. And sometimes the Battelle Developmental Inventory tool is not quite sensitive enough for really, really young babies. And it could be a case where the evaluators use their informed clinical opinion to make an argument with very strict parameters that that child would benefit from early intervention. So yes and no.
I will just add that there is a national movement to get younger and younger and younger identification of autism. That's happening we see that like globally. And so although all children in Part C are identified as developmental delay, it is possible that they would have a diagnosis of autism. As we know, you might have autism and not be eligible for special education at that transition. But there's a lot happening though with that particular diagnosis, and I think it's just something to be aware of. Parents are looking for that kind of identification prior to the 3rd birthday.
Absolutely. And we do facilitate that in early intervention. We globally screen all children between 16 and 32 months for autism, and that can lead to a psychological evaluation. One thing to think about that will come up during a transition conference, if a child has been referred for a psychological evaluation and it has not yet occurred, that is a conversation that needs to be considered and discussed during a transition conference, because of course we hope that it will be completed, but there are very rare scenarios where the transition conference will happen and then that evaluation might take place afterward. And that is why we're really working to make sure that we have really close communication for any changes that might happen after the transition conference, and potentially before your next IEP meetings, because that would be a really significant thing for you all to be aware of if a child received an autism diagnosis after that.
So I know that there are other questions in the chat, but it looks like Kathy had some follow-up questions to your response. So
oh goodness, yes. And I'm so glad she's asking, because one, I think, creates a little confusion. So any child that is served under age 3 is served by early intervention for me. So all of those eligibility considerations that I just mentioned are ours. You don't have to worry about that until we share information with you to hold that transition conference as the child approaches their 3rd birthday. You do not need to, worry about a child that's 1.5 necessarily. We serve that child until their 3rd birthday. Does that make sense? Am I understanding that question?
Yeah, it sounds like you did answer that. And Kathy, I'm not okay. Are you all set now, Kathy, with that question?
Perfect. And Kathy, I would love to connect if you would like to have a conversation about this individually. I would love to help with that as well.
Okay.
It's very new. The CDB transition is very new, and early intervention is not the same thing as special education. So it is, something that we haven't contemplated. We didn't have to worry about it because we met children when they were 5. So and we're also in the process of, making things more clear in the CDB transition with written policies that will help as well, so that you have that to look forward to as well.
So Beth, I'm going to read your question, but just please clarify if I am not interpreting it correctly. So Beth has a question. If a student was provided Part C, but the IFSP is no longer active, and then the family seeks services and evaluations prior to the 3rd birthday, but it is within the 2.3 to 3-year window, who takes the lead, Part C or Part B? And is this part of what you're presenting next, Ariana?
This is a perfect segue into our final topic. So let me do better here on my deck from current slide. Cooperate. Oh gosh, it's everywhere. Sorry, I have so many screens. Let me try this again. I'm just gonna do it how I did it before. Let's see.
It's hard when you have multiple screens.
Oh, so many screens. And then I don't want everyone looking at the back of my head. Seems rude. Why? Okay. I swear I never have this happen. Let's see, how can I do this? I'm gonna pull it over here.
You did have a slide that said late referrals.
Yes,
Yeah, I think that's what you might be looking for.
that is what I'm hoping for. I
We
just
did
want to
see-
get it onto the right view here. Okay, that's good, that's good. Okay. Why is this so hard today? I'll put you guys over here. Is this what you're seeing again, Lou?
Yep, so I'm seeing the slide on late referrals right now. We do still have the gray
The
bar
text.
of yes, we're seeing the text of late referrals less than 45 before the child's 3rd birthday.
Do you see yourself?
No, but I do see the gray bar that indicates your toolbar for Zoom. There, it's gone.
Okay. Okay. I don't even know where I'm at. I'm just gonna click and talk. Okay. So there are kind of 2 categories of really significant late referrals that we want to talk about today. One is children that are referred. Let's see. I'm so sorry. Are you now seeing late referrals 45 to 90 days?
No, we're seeing slide number 12 at the bottom right-hand corner says late referrals less than 45 before the child's 3rd birthday.
Okay. I am gonna unplug all these screens. I am so sorry. This is just.
No worries. It's February.
Does anybody else have the
Back of a
slides
month.
that we can project?
That's a good idea. Ariana, do you want to shoot the PowerPoint to me and I can go ahead and project it?
You could. I think I'm gonna get there.
Oh, okay.
I did send it to you though as well. Okay. Can you all see yourself?
Yep.
Oh, my goodness. It's a good thing I'm not the data manager anymore, huh? All right. So I want to talk about late referrals 45 to 90 days before the child's 3rd birthday. So these are kids that are referred to early intervention for me when they are 2 years and 9 months old, which, as we previously discussed, that is the timeline that Part C has to hold the transition conference before. So by law, we are no longer required to hold a transition conference. But of course, we still need to facilitate a smooth transition into early childhood special education. So it's likely that we will have a transition conference anyway, as soon as possible after that child is determined eligible for early intervention. The next category of kiddos are children that are referred to early intervention for me less than 45 days before their third birthday. So in early intervention, we have 45 days to complete an eligibility evaluation and write the IFSP. And so because we would not have time to essentially enroll a child in early intervention and actually provide any services before a child turns 3, by law, that child is not considered served by Part C. And with the parent's consent, we can refer them directly to early childhood special education. So this touches on Kathy's question, and these are just some more visual ways to look at this. So essentially, if a child is referred 9 months before their third birthday, when they're 2 years and 3 months old, we can begin the formal transition process, and we will as soon as they enter early intervention. And so essentially, not much changes at that age range. If they're 2 years and 6 months old, and these both are Part C early intervention responsibilities, we would try to have them sign a consent to share information as soon as possible after they're determined eligible and have their IFSP written, so that we can facilitate the transition conference as soon as possible and make sure that that happens before the child is 2 years and 9 months old. If they are referred 3 months before their third birthday, 2 years and 9 months, that timeline for us for the transition conference has already passed. And so we aren't held to that timeline, but we do need to make sure that we are helping the family transition into early childhood special education with the parental consent. So a colleague recently described this as an accordion. If you have a child enrolled in early intervention for some time before their third birthday and you have plenty of time to prepare for all of this, it's spacious and you have lots of time to plan and it goes really smoothly. The less time you have, your accordion is kind of squeezing you and you have to rush, lots of activities into a short period of time. And it's not ideal for families, I think, because learning about early intervention and early childhood special education simultaneously and doing, all those evaluations and intake processes is a lot in a short period of time. But we make it work, and we are dedicated to collaborating with all of you to make it as smooth as possible. So 1.5 months, 45 days before the child is 3, or 2 years, 10.5 months old, that child would be referred directly to you as kind of a typical intake child, not a C to B transition kiddo. So now I really want to see faces and see if that answered that question about late referrals. Or if anyone has any other questions about late referrals or anything else we've talked about.
I think one of the questions that might come up for schools is if they are first aware of a referral at 2 years, 9 months, they're likely not going to have enough time to get the evaluations done and have an IEP meeting, particularly if it's 1 or 2 months before their third birthday. So the question for us or for them would be, are we still held to the timeline of having a child identified prior to the third birthday when we simply don't have the wherewithal to do it?
That's a great question, Lou. And stepping out of my Part C shoes and back into my data manager shoes, no. If a child is referred after 2-9 to Part C early intervention, the law recognizes that you don't have time to do that. You are held to the 60-day timeline after evaluation, but you need to have the IEP written as soon as possible after the third birthday, but it doesn't necessarily have to be written before the third birthday if it cannot be based on that timeline. There may be, I learned of a Part B timeline today that I wasn't aware of. So there may be Part B timelines. And so I think we need to internally discuss and kind of look at that, because there might be some very Part B specific timelines that I'm not aware of that impact that.
Beth, you have your hand raised.
I do. Your answer, I think, sort of helped because I'm the one that asked that question. We received an inquiry from a family in the community who was seeking services, but they had an IFSP that had lapsed. And so, we have 6 months till the child's 3rd birthday, but that was sort of put towards the school district because it's our window for eligibility. And so that family's kind of in limbo without services from Part C while we are now completing our evaluations. But it's also making me think when you were sharing the piece about the psychological or like evaluations that are continuing with the Part C team, as we've already agreed to, completing our pieces in an eligibility referral meeting. And we've had a situation where we learned about a child 2 months before their 3rd birthday, met on that child with the results of evaluations being completed by the Part C team 2 weeks before their birthday, but the psychological wasn't available. There wasn't substantial information to identify. And so we had to reconvene when the psych was available. And I just feel like a lot of these transitions are really clunky because it seems like there's a lot going on with Part C. We're trying to jump in and follow the special education guidelines. But and I can't even imagine how it feels for the family. So I think that more conversation needs to take place because it works when you put it on a flow chart, but those actual situations don't come up packaged within the flow chart. And I just don't know who holds the responsibility for not meeting when there's this kind of clunky handoff.
So that's a great question. It is Part B's responsibility for that evaluation. I'm sorry, the transition from Part C to the federal deadline reporting, that's Part B. But I will say, Beth, that we are working with Ariana and Dan and Sandy and I are working on a way to potentially make that transition a little bit more smooth, because there's already a lot of data in that team to potentially qualify for developmental delay while you are waiting for an evaluation. And so that's something that we're going to be working with Part C staff, because that is historically CDS has waited for all evaluations to be in if there's a special consideration, and they haven't gone like in a public school. We would meet at the 45-day timeline, no matter whatever was done, we'd meet. So CDS has been doing that a little bit differently, but I hear your concerns. We want to make sure, so the team internally is working on how can we work to support a smoother transition. We also know we have a dearth of school psychologists. We're working on that. And in a couple of years, there's going to be about 50 more school psych staff in Maine, but that's in a couple of years. So, I think, but it's a great point. And I think there's more we can do to make that a little bit smoother of a transition. Just know that we know it is something that's happening out there.
And Beth, I'd love to, I pulled up your specific question. If a child is 2 years and 3 months, really the best thing that should be done is that child would be referred to early intervention for me. Even if they did have a previous IFSP, it's likely to be even easier for them to just resume that IFSP, and then the early intervention team can help to facilitate the transition process. If it is after, if it's 2 weeks before their 3rd birthday, that's when it just wouldn't make sense to involve us, and we don't need to be involved. And then you could begin really essentially the child find process for Part B without involving early intervention for me. Does that better answer your specific question? Your first specific question?
It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
not to beat a dead horse, but I know that with schools, particularly the rural schools I've worked in, the availability of evaluators in July and August is, it's sad. So, it's not going to be the majority of cases, but we will get a crunch of cases 2 or 3 months before the third birthday. And in schools, sometimes we don't accept new referrals from staff after April 1st, knowing that the window can't be met. So I think for all of the nervous special ed directors like I was, I think you just have to realize if you can't do it, you can't do it. If you get a ding on a review, you get a ding on a review, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, we will do everything we can, but I know in Washington County, trying to get a psych eval or even a speech eval over the summer is near impossible. So just live with it. It's okay. Is that right, Aaron? Don't fret too much.
I always say, I probably should say this, I would say there's no special ed jail, right? Like, yes, it would be a reporting, and we have a lot of, people, the OSEP is, looking at our CDB transition, because even without SAUs, the transitions haven't been adequate. And so we're really working as a Part C system and a Part C system and Part B system in CDS to really increase that number, because we want to be more compliant than we are. So yeah. But I will also say, when you look at where the disability category is across the population, we still are really underrepresenting in developmental delay. And I think, at some point historically, CDS was, before I got here, anybody was encouraged not to find with developmental delay. We have the most strict criteria for developmental delay, meaning when you meet that criteria, it means that you are significantly off of an average on your the 5 domain functions. So functional assessment. So I think that that's something that does not require a school psychologist and should be considered when you're looking at that transition. So I would just say that we are, you're right, you're going to not have those people available for you in the summer. CDS staff are around all summer, but we don't have any school psych staff on CDS. We don't have them yet. We may.
Can I piggyback on that, Erin? Do you mind?
Not at all.
I was hoping, because this is, I know that this is very, very new to all of you, but it's also pretty new to all of us, because our CDS Part B has operated primarily on the calendar year schedule as well. So it's kind of new for us to kind of think about planning ahead for the transition kiddos, to try our best to convene the transition conference before the end of the school year to alleviate some of those concerns. So I don't know if folks have ideas or feedback on how we can do that. We're certainly thinking about it and shifting that practice within early intervention. But of course, and more, I don't have solid data on it, but since COVID, we and nationwide, it's talked about a lot, kids are being referred later and later, closer to their third birthday. And it has always been anecdotally a discussion with families when you reach out from early intervention. Some families want to wait until preschool age to seek early childhood special education. But what they might not realize is how much we can help facilitate that smooth transition for them. And of course, don't even get me started about the benefits of early intervention. But we definitely have families like Beth's scenario where they don't utilize their IFSP, but then as their child is approaching 3, they recognize that they want to prepare for the third birthday. So that late referral window, which I consider anything after 2, it does have these really specific requirements on both sides that might make it feel much more clunky for an older child that's coming into early intervention that late and needs that transition to happen quickly.
Susie Perry, I know you're on this call. I might be I think I am misremembering. I feel like, is there something that happens for children who have a summer third birthday that other states kind of look at that summer birthday as, and maybe she's not on the call.
I'm here. I'm listening.
Okay. Is it true that other states kind of anticipate that summer third birthday and kind of act a little earlier? Am I making that up?
No, I mean, it's a best practice activity that we've been trying to support schools to adopt. And so there are so many different scenarios. Children, the date that they enter into early intervention, their interest in early intervention, their the school's preparedness to be able to participate in the transition conference. And there's so many variables, but I think what we're all saying is that we're all going to work towards, anticipating a little bit better when that child's third birthday is, and collaborating and working together so that we can get the child in by 3, not just because it's, the law, but it's because it's good for kids to get them the services as soon as possible. So it's a work in progress for all of us. And I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Right. So if a child is turning, so thank you. If a child is turning 3 in July or August, obviously their services are going to potentially, well, no, I can't even say that. We still have 30 days. Forget I said that. I'm going to stop there because I think I'm confusing people. But obviously, these are things that we are working to articulate really clearly in terms of what the law is versus best practice versus recommended strategies to make it potentially easier in an SAU when you do have a dearth of staff over the summer. And so we are, writing that guidance into Muser right now, writing it into the C2B transition, and all of that is, again, very new for the SAUs. It's also new for the state to consider that transition occurring with an SAU instead of internally with CDS. So it's been a big learning curve for CDS as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a little bit about making some scenarios and kind of thinking through different, ways that this could present for school districts. And so that's work that we've been talking about doing to help.
Mariana, do you have any of the data? I remember when I worked for CDS, it seemed that we had a fairly significant number of new referrals to early intervention between 2 and 2.5. I don't know if you still have any of the data, but it seems to me that that is quite a conglomerate of referrals in that particular age range, pretty darn close to age 3. When they're earlier, the transition can be very smooth. Is there a lot of kids, a little number? What do you think?
We are, and I don't have specific data off the top of my head right now, but I definitely will gather it and report it out to all of you. What we're seeing is children referred even later than that, which is much more challenging, especially when, and kind of back to Beth's point as well, like we have our timelines and our priorities, and then Part B has their timelines and priorities, and it gets busy for families. And it's really unfortunate when compliance is, impacting the family friendliness of our work, which I think is a balance always. I've seen so many kids that were determined eligible like 5 days before they turned 2-9. So we missed that timeline, but my goodness, what would you do? What can you do? So it is balancing family friendliness. Like, you just met us and now we want to have a transition conference before we've even written your IFSP. So there are definitely some wrinkles that we're trying to iron out to make it both more family friendly and compliant. But we're definitely seeing more kids that are the 2 years old to 2.5 years old concern me much less than the children that are between 2 years and 6 months and their third birthday. Because not only do we miss the opportunity to help them before they're 3, really in a meaningful way, building a relationship and providing intervention, we're then really kind of rushing them to their third birthday because there's a lot to do to prepare for it. So sometimes it can be that the transition plan is the plan for those kids that come in that late. That's the priority. But I will definitely pull some data and report it out to this group. I think that would be really interesting.
And there's some things that we can do too, is, you know, getting out that information to families about the availability of early intervention and the effectiveness of early intervention to help, you know, facilitate them participating earlier. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we can do to make it so that it works the best that it can.
Absolutely, Susie. That's a great point and a perfect segue into kind of explaining our new name, Early Intervention for Me. We are doing so much work in that area to spread public awareness about what early intervention looks like and the benefits of it. And we have a brand new website. I'm developing lots of new materials, and we got lots of great family-friendly materials through our rebranding campaign. So we're working on that, absolutely. And we are seeing increases in infants entering early intervention earlier between their birth and their first birthday. So we are definitely making good progress moving towards kids entering early intervention sooner, but we are also seeing some kids enter later.
Are there any other questions for Ariana? Okay. Well, if you have questions about any Part C to Part B scenario, situation, referral, Ariana, I would assume that you would suggest that they reach out to their local early intervention program manager, correct?
That is a great recommendation. I think they're very knowledgeable, and continuing to build that relationship is definitely a great idea.
Thank you, everybody, and have a great evening.
Thank you.